Good morning, guys. Happy New Year. So good to see you guys. So my family and I just got back a few days ago for about a week with my in-laws in Central California. There's a higher cow population than the people. Now, my in-laws are wonderful and took us to the coast for a few days. There was an afternoon, I took a long walk on the beach, as we all enjoy. And as I'm chewing on ideas for the sermon, I remember looking up ahead and you see the cliffs hit the ocean, you see the fog rolling back, and for a moment, you're like, oh my gosh, God made this. He's so big, and he is the creator of the universe, and he wants to be in communion with me. It's kind of humbling. And I think it's safe to say all of us want God to be big. He is, after all, the Alpha and the Omega, the creator of this beautiful universe. And there's this assumption that God's primary attributes were unrestrained power and undeniable glory. This was often described in the Old Testament. But what we were introduced to during Advent was a mere infant, born in a stable, soon to be crucified. So how could these two be the same? I think let's ask ourselves this morning, what do we want God to be? How do we want God to act? The Danish Christian philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said, "It would have satisfied our intellectual hankerings if God had appeared as a very rare, tremendously large green bird than a homeless rabbi." I think we're often sold this story of faith that we're going to do big things for God, as we want God to be big. We want him to act big and do big things. We're going to solve world hunger and have some amazing nonprofit. And if you grew up like a millennial like me, and you weren't wearing your Toms to youth group, were you really making a difference for God? It was go home or go big and make a big change for Jesus, and a lot of us went home, defeated that we weren't going to be the change makers we were sold on being, often left wondering where was this big God in a dark world. So focused on seeing big that we kind of lost what was small right in front of us. We're often told here that we're going to be transformers. We're going to transform the world. We see it play out in politics very loudly today. The government can transform us into a Christian nation. If we get Christian political leaders, then we'll have Christian laws, and we just need Christian power, and God will do big and mighty things. Even on the opposite side, if we have the right power, then we can bring change to society and laws to pursue justice. But let's look at the very nature of this God. The so-called godly power came in something very small. It was the opposite of our expectations, the very opposite of glory through power and might. See, God meets us. He tabernacles with us in our humanity. In our sin, he dwelled among us and actively pursues us. You see, God is not dependent on the world. God created the world from nothing. The world, however, is dependent on God. The God who created the universe in all his glory just wants to commune with you. See, Luke tells a story of a young woman conceiving a child out of wedlock, giving birth in a stable, the skies erupting with angelic proclamations. There was a star guiding the shepherds, magi coming from the far east. It's kind of a wild story when you think about it. Step back. I don't think anyone else's birth stories were like that. And later in the first chapter of John, Jesus is calling his disciples, and Philip goes up to Nathanael, telling the one whom Moses wrote about. And Nathanael kind of cheekily responds with, Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? And patiently, Philip invites him to come and see. Now let's step back about 170 years before Jesus. Now I'm going to kind of painting with a broad brush, so all you history buffs, you don't need to come find me after. Um, there was a Maccabean revolt led by the Hasmonean priest Mattathias and continued by his son Judas. They gave him the nickname Maccabeus, which means the hammerer. With his brothers, they overthrew the Seleucids, ending years of extreme Jewish oppression. However, like most stories play out, the Hasmonean leaders became corrupt. The Roman general Pompey took over, and once again, the Jews found themselves waiting for God to reclaim and redeem creation. See, this Maccabean period is significant in that it shaped the imagination of Jesus' generation. They were waiting eagerly for God to come and deliver that nation from the oppression of its enemies. What they imagined, what they're waiting for, was kind of like Judas Maccabeus, a violent warrior who would, in the name of Israel's God, would wipe out the Romans and establish God's reign of justice and peace. So you kind of imagine when Jesus was born and the Son of God is proclaimed, I think we can kind of empathize the skepticism that a lot of the Jews, especially the Pharisees, faced. This was the very opposite of what they were expecting. The expectation was for God to come as an earthly king, with power and might to restore Israel, to end the oppression that they were under once again with the iron fist of Rome. Mary proclaims this upside-down kingdom from the very beginning in her song. God has shown strength with God's arm. God has scattered the proud in their thoughts and hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. The very ways that God broke through, meeting us in our humanity, much different than what was expected, inviting us into the very story of salvation. See, in his humanity, Jesus had a mother. He bore genetics. He was an infant, a toddler, a child, born into a family in the small town of Bethlehem. No one disputed that Jesus was a real man. He had a body, he was hungry, he bled and felt the pain of the cross, and after a full day of traveling, he was tired. He needed to get away for rest and prayer. He broke down and wept. In every way, except sin, Jesus shared our humanity. But he also healed the sick and cured diseases. When he noted hunger, he offered bread. He cast out demons. He did not offer an escape route from the reality, but met most people where they were, intruding into the full human condition and modeling a new way of living. Augustine, in one of his sermons, writes, "The maker of man became man, that he, ruler of the stars, might be nourished at the breast, that he, the bread, might be hungry, that he, the fountain, might thirst, that he, the light, might sleep, that he, the way, might be wearied by the journey, that he, the truth, might be accused by false witnesses, that he, the judge of the living and the dead, might be brought to trial by a mortal judge, that he, the justice, might be condemned by the unjust, that he, the teacher, might be scourged with whips, that he, the vine, might be crowned with thorns, that he, the foundation, might be suspended upon a cross, that strength might be weakened, that he who makes well might be wounded, that life might die." Vividly remember a few years ago, I don't know if y'all have read this book, it was called Gentle and Lowly. And seeing Jesus for the first time as someone who was lowly, it's kind of a radical shift, and I was almost in denial about it. I didn't really like that word lowly. It didn't really sit well. To be honest, I kind of shut the book away, put it away for a while. No, you see, my Jesus was powerful. My Jesus was the one that came down to save us, like some sort of superhero movie. Showed the Pharisees what's up, flipped some tables in the tabernacles, and rescued me from the very hands of Satan. That, is the very opposite of lowly, and that was the very opposite of the picture that I was painted. And it's everything that contradicts power and greed. And so what does this mean for us today? And as I came back to that book later and understood it to be humility, to be as gentle as a savior, to be the one that's the shepherd who waits for the lost sheep, and modeling the very posture of the glory of God. I think often today, this idea of, I think a lot of people say, I'm spiritual, I'm seeking spiritualization. And it's this quest to kind of find something that we're looking for. We're finding God. I think we seek retreats looking to find a spiritual experience. A lot of Christians today will have devout practices or will seek intellectual efforts. The more I can find out about God, the more I'll know him, right? And it leaves us placing this idea on the idol of it's up to us to find God. But what if God is the one that seeks us? If you've ever played hide and seek with a toddler, count slowly, give enough time to hide, promising not to peek, and then you hear them not so quietly running off, usually laughing or singing in the midst of it. And it often ends with them kind of hiding behind something like a curtain. And then as you're trying to find them, they pop out. They're like, here I am. And it's mostly defeating the purpose of looking, or really the game altogether. And so in our humanity, the idea of the incarnation is counterintuitive to seeking. God's right in front of us. He's kind of saying, here I am. Christianity is really the only religion where the infinite descended. It's not us to seek him. It's not us to do this quest to find him or to become more spiritual. Jesus Christ came down to be with us, and that has nothing to do with our doing. God didn't just do something for us, he joined us. God, the creator, defended to be with us, to walk with us, to hunger and thirst with us, took up the lowly postures and communed with us. God isn't some distant thing. He's not just sitting out there watching or caring about our souls, be like, all right, we'll just check in when they die and hopefully their souls will make it up here. He's with us in these moments, tomorrow at work or back to school this week, in our day-to-day lives. He cares about us in the here and now, in this already not yet time we find ourselves in. When we open our eyes to look and see him working, restoring creation, like a toddler jumping out, saying, here I am. After having met by the living God in the flesh of a Jew from Nazareth, we look for God at church, in our jobs. Like the shepherds, we seek God in angelic voices in the night sky and at the smelly cow stable. I expect to see Jesus among us here today, later conversations, and maybe even someone who I disagree with. And after God became incarnate in a dusty, undistinguished place like Bethlehem, expect God's incursions, even where you live. We see in Jesus that God is so completely loving, so determined to tabernacle and have a relationship with us, that God shows up, often in the most inopportune moments and in the most unlikely places. The Trinity is so relentlessly determined to self-reveal, to find us, to be with us. In one of Israel's most desperate hours, one of the most divine promises is made in Jeremiah. They will be my people, and I will be their God. He's actively pursuing us. We may wander, we may lose it all, but like the prodigal son, he is actively running towards us, welcoming us into his arms. See, the incarnation is not proved in some deep, complex theological thinking, but rather faithful living as we attempt to embody in our humanity the divine mystery of the God who refused to be without us, welcoming us into his arms. In his book, The Incarnation, William Willimon tells a story of a missionary bishop, Leslie Newbigin, who gave a Bible to a Hindu friend. A few weeks later, the friend returned the Bible, complaining, this is not a religious book. It hardly mentions the gods. It's filled with stories of ordinary and even bad people. See, God uses the ordinary, the unwed mother, the Pharisee, the carpenter, tax collector, or today I look out and I see the teachers, the students, the lawyers, the doctors, the CPAs. He meets us where we're at, and he brings radical transformation. The words I've written out today could fall under the category of a sermon, but a sermon is as faithful as it is performed. It's embodied, lived out in our Christian lives, not just spoken by me up here this morning. As we wrap up and go into a moment of silence, just want you to think about Jesus didn't just speak truth. He came down, he performed the truth, enfleshed in the Word and in all of God's